Dun, dun, dun.
This is the Justuff League.
And welcome back, everybody, to the Justuff League. Yeah, there we go. We're back, everybody. Your favorite podcast about all that stuff that you love to collect, buy, and hopefully make a bunch of money on or lose money. Right? That's a pretty good synopsis, I think.
Yeah, well, that's life.
Most people lose money on it. Occasionally they get a few nickels out, but
That is Mr. James Supp, very freshly shaven with glasses.
I know. Yeah, for my 46th birthday, I decided to get glasses, shave, and cripple myself. So, blew my knee out a couple of days ago. So, if you watch roadshows this season, you'll see me clumping around with a cane.
That's
Walking with a step and a half.
Hey, Supp, just imagine the sympathy vote you'd get from people, like all the people on... Oh, God, James, what happened? Let me massage your meniscus.
That just sounds terrible.
Right off the bat.
Oh, I'm going to milk it. Absolutely.
You milk it? No.
Then we have
Let's go
Mr.
milk my
Kevin
meniscus.
Bruneau,
Hey, y'all.
sporting a brand new spring-summer 2023 variable editions
Yes,
hat.
I've got it
I
on.
love it.
Ooh.
Love the
Forest
rep.
green.
Yeah,
Are you going to be
Forrest-
handing out swag on that sometime soon?
Yes, I can. James, I'll have to hook you up with his hat.
Excellent.
We got forest green, charcoal gray, and butter yellow.
Ooh, let's go with butter yellow.
Yeah, I love the butter yellow. I was rocking the butter yellow. And then
Just
last,
like the butter.
and last but certainly not least, the one and only talented producer Kyle.
Hello, Justuff League listeners. Hello. I have returned for another episode 241, if my calculations are correct. And I assure you, they're probably correct.
That's awesome.
Wait, does episode 241, does that include the very first couple episodes we recorded with you? Oh, wait, we didn't record a couple episodes with you. That's what it was.
Hey, buddy. All right, first of all, who the fuck sits down to record 6 podcasts in a day? That's first. Second of all, I saved like 2 out of 6, okay? So get out of my face. I did what I could, given the circumstances. That was the first day I met Ashley Landry. I thought she was going to slash my tires on the way out of there and beat me up in the parking lot. But you know what? Ashley, I love her to death now, so I'm happy that all turned around for me.
It was one of the greatest auditions ever. So producer Kyle comes in. He rolls in all ready to show us what for and start recording our podcast.
Show us
And-
what for. I got a phone call like 2 hours before you guys were supposed to hit record, and they were like, yeah, it's already set up. It's all set, man. Just show up and hit record. And then I showed up there, and it was not all set up, and I could not just hit record.
But then you got it all set up. And what did you do after that?
I didn't have Kevin's mic adjusted correctly. It was completely saturated with reverb. I had to cut it. But you know what? Who cares?
Look where you
I
are
mean,
today, PK.
It was just a local real estate mogul in our area who had to come back and re-record his episode a couple months later because I'm an idiot. But it's a learning experience, baby.
Hey, look
But it
where you
was
are
great.
today,
And-
though, PK.
Yeah, I'm a
And
member
he's
of the
not made a
Justuff
misstep.
League.
He has not made a misstep since.
This is true. Well, today's episode, to get us on top, as much as I love talking about producer Kyle's
Yeah, man,
early
what the hell?
failures in the podcast world,
Trying to tell people how I
I'm
came up.
talking about his successes. You start at the bottom, then you build them up.
Now
Then
look
you
who we
occasionally
are.
kick-
We get
Yeah.
like dozens of views on YouTube.
oh,
Cousins.
God. Well,
That's
today's
awesome.
today's topic, the
Makes me
title
wanna vomit,
might not.
honestly.
No, the title might not be the most titillating that you've heard or read on the Justuff League, but portraiture. What makes a portrait valuable? Why is it valuable? What are the factors? And what makes your family portrait valuable or just an instant ancestor that nobody else cares about the person but you?
Well,
Truth.
I mean, let's start out with Kevin. Kevin, how many portraits do you guys think you sell a year?
Well, let's put it this way. How many portraits did I used to sell? I don't sell as many as I used to because the portrait market is probably for what we see, not what it is. Because people are looking for, in my opinion, a more modern looking portrait for their house, which we'll talk later about some really great modern artists that do portraits today. And like your 19th century portraits aren't as hot as they used to be. They're not like, there's people not standing in the doorways like they used to be to buy portraits anymore. So
I think getting right into it, there's two important factors that come into play with portraiture. One, obviously, the artist who painted it, but outside of the artist, the sitter, the subject of the portrait, can be equally, if not more important than the artist that painted it, right? Because you can have incredible portraits of identified subjects, but we don't know who the artist is.
True.
Well, and vice versa. I mean, are there a bunch of known artists out there who have no idea who it is that they actually painted?
That is true. I mean, because we get so many portraits, right? Or we go to auctions and we see portraits for sale, like your typical early 19th century wealthy gentleman in a black, not a tuxedo, but we'll call it black overcoat, white collar, big poof of hair on his head. But who the hell is he? Who the hell wants a painting of a middle-aged white guy from 200 years ago on their wall?
True. I mean, it's just if you see, I mean, everything is a very big movement toward modernism today. Whether you're 80 years old or you're 8 years old, you're pretty well moving toward a modern world. And modern living today doesn't usually have room for one of those creepy old little girl portraits or a creepy guy portrait with a high-waisted collar around his neck. This guy looks like he's turning into Dracula anytime soon. Right? And it's like, and anybody would have a brain in their head. It's like, I would have that in my house as much as I'm going to have like a big fucking poster of like a normal-looking Dracula on my wall, maybe holding a pipe. I mean, what the hell? Think about it, really.
But then you got this little girl.
Right.
She's
different.
Adorable.
She is adorable.
But you have
creepy.
a cat. You have a cat. Major game changer.
Right. But this is
she's
a little
got murder
softer.
in her eyes.
So if you have country decor, I mean, so is that other creepy dude, but this is going to go like right along with beautiful country decor. But country decor is, in some areas very popular, but if you're playing odds here, it's not the most popular decor out there. So that's why you have choice of great old portraits today. Nothing like you had before. Great choice today.
I just want to show how we just, within those two examples Supp pulled up, when we're talking about like early 19th century or 18th century portraiture, you have two routes you can take, right? There's one, which is the realist perspective, where like you're going to have this exceptionally well executed portrait that looks real and divine. But the flip side of it is when you get to primitive and folk art portraiture, I swear, and Kev, correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't it like the flatter, the uglier, and the more distorted for that folky primitive portraiture better?
Yeah. When you get that nice flat country look, just like the same surface you want to see on a pantry box. It's the same surface. Like
that's more
that's flat, but that's
style,
more like
though.
English kind of sort of, I think. But I think like that one you had up there, like those are very flat and stuff like that. Like those are very
terrible.
They ain't that terrible. They're not terrible for good primitive portraits because they are very flat, and that's what they want to see. They want to see things very simplistic, just like a country thing would be. It wouldn't have a zipper stitch on it. It would just have a very simple loop stitch through it. So
if we're talking flat primitive portraiture, I think one of the biggest names that you pull up is definitely Pryor, Pryor School, or
the Pryor School.
Is it William?
Portrait.
Is it William Pryor?
Yeah.
Are we positive?
I know him as Billy, but most people call him Willie.
Hey, Billy!
Willie, it's all the same.
You gotta come paint my daughter with her kitten. It's gonna look awesome.
You gotta put the kitten on a leash, though. Otherwise, it's not gonna feel weird enough.
It's a savage kitten.
Oh, here we go, Supp.
So there we go. There is a very flat portrait we're looking at. It's of a little girl. Her bangs look like something of a 1830s doll that would be made out of porcelain and just like on her head, like as a toupee kind of looks.
Yeah.
And
it looks like a plastic wig.
Yeah, plastic wig. Kind of plain features, she's got the little blue dress holding the flowers, and her arms are a little, stunted looking. And that's the way they painted them back then. They made them look a little stocky, and that's what gives them that unique, folky look.
Now, is this an actual Pryor Supp, or is this like a Pryor School? What'd that sell for?
$34,000.
Yeah.
Holy Toledo!
Yeah, in 2017.
Yeah. And in 2008, that probably would have been 70,000.
Holy Toledo, he says. Oh my God.
Dude, that's a shit ton of money.
It totally is,
Yeah.
but the reaction being Holy Toledo is just a whole different kind of funny.
I mean, that was a
beat.
bee's knees there,
Buffalo,
Travis.
New York. Yeah.
What is that weird? Is that weird because of Toledo, Ohio, or is that weird because of the
sounded like your
Toledo Scale
grandfather.
Company?
Neither.
That's
It's
something my
just a funny
great-grandmother would
phrase.
say.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
If you're watching this podcast, which sounds weird, but if you're actually watching this podcast, you're going to see a lot of very old portraits.
Look at
from
that.
both 18th and 19th century that we're looking at.
Hey,
This
look
poor
at this
girl's
one.
hairline never stood
I mean-
a chance, huh?
Portrait artists go way back before that. I mean, you could get back to 17th century. Rembrandt was a portrait artist, right? You had all these people who were doing portraits way before these people. Leonardo da Vinci was a portrait artist.
Yeah.
Well,
Vermeer was
everybody
a
who's
portrait artist, right?
Every
So all
classical
these-
painter.
So as you go right on down the line, I just found this really cool website that shows like what people are having done and what the cool artists today are doing as portraiture. And I think that's something we should look at too. And that's why you see a swing toward that modern look and why people are more apt to have a portrait that we'll look at very, very soon in the future than have an old school portrait like this, unless you definitely have the decor for this. And that's the only people who would have it. But even these new ones, these new portraits that are out, I'm going to call them new portraits, but the 21st century modern works here, contemporary works, are very, very cool and very colorful and just take on a whole different vibe than what an old one did. So you can see why the movement has definitely moved toward a modern look.
Well,
Right.
I think
I gotta get this 5 head off the screen. Kevin, what's the website that you just mentioned?
I can. It's if you go to frederickmagazine.com, it's Frederick, FREDERIC magazine, one word.com, right?
But I think before we tackle and jump to contemporary, we need to show the other side of 18th, 19th century portraiture, the realist perspective, which would be like a Gilbert Stuart or a Benjamin West. I mean, these are...
Yeah, well, like Gilbert Stuart, everyone knows the portrait of George Washington, or they should.
The half-finished one.
But didn't he
Yeah.
do the first... Gilbert Stuart did what, the first 5 or the first 6 presidents?
First several presidents. He did several early American presidents. Probably no more than 5.
I love that generic.
How's that
He
sound?
did several early presidents.
Yeah,
He did a lot, though. I think he did up through Madison.
sure. But like, here's a copy of the Gilbert Stuart Washington. I mean, you can Google it. You know this picture. I mean,
It's on your dollar bill.
He painted 5 presidents.
5. Nice.
See? Hey, look how I came on. I said 5 or 6. I was close coming off the cuff.
And but a lot of these guys, that's how they made their money. Was being itinerant portrait painters, and like Kevin was saying, everybody was getting their portrait painted. There was no photography back then.
I don't
So there's
believe
a lot of this art out
he-
there.
I don't believe he actually painted the portraits when they were like president.
Not from life,
Right.
but painted portraits of.
Yeah, he was commissioned to paint the first 5 presidents by this guy, Colonel George Gibbs of Rhode Island, believe it or not. And
Rhode Island pops up a lot.
and the group was painted in Boston during the last during the end of like his career of Stuart's career, toward the end of his life there, not life, but his painting life, and that's when it was done. So yes, he painted 5 presidents, but it's not like he traveled and painted all these guys like in their room. Probably painted them from pictures.
Yeah.
But I think if you were to compare this 2 styles today of what upholds more value, I definitely think the realist historical portraiture definitely holds up. I mean, what are like the most recent results when you're looking at Gilbert Stuart or even Benjamin West? I mean, Benjamin West, he he did the famous painting of Paul Revere.
Yeah,
bunch
but
of
when
other
you say
dudes.
historical paintings hold up, of course they hold a lot more merit than just a painting of this lady in New Hampshire that happened to have money and had her portrait done by William Pryor. And actually, she didn't have money when she had her portrait done by William Pryor. It wasn't like they would have had a better artist than William Pryor because he was like an itinerant artist. He would have traveled.
Folk portraiture
Around.
was definitely of that time the lesser. I hate to say lesser. That's terrible, but the more affordable,
Less skilled
for the
artist.
for the common folk.
Yeah, there
Well,
was
like, let's say-
literally
so-
artists that would drive around and say, "Hey, would you like your portrait painted? It's going to be $1.25." And the person would be like, "Yeah, I'd love a portrait painted." So the person would paint their portrait.
Well-
They would sit and get painted, and it was a pretty flat painting. It was painted very quickly, probably within a couple hours. And the person got paid their money. They got the painting, and on they went. And hopefully, asked the next neighbor, like selling Hoover vacuums, door to door, I guess.
So here's what I found curious just doing the research on this is that, good Benjamin West portrait is, $10,000, $20,000, give or take. Some of these other folks are kind of in that same $10,000 to $20,000 range, unless it's an important person like Paul Revere or some such. But this general portrait of somebody is about 10 to 20 grand. That's about the same size, same price as a good quality, flat, primitive or folk art style portrait. Tends to go around $10,000 to $20,000. There are always exceptions. There are some that go to 40 to 60,000, but they're all kind of in the same range. And very quickly on the folk art, there's a huge gap. It quickly goes from 10 grand, 2 grand to 500 to $50.
Yeah,
Or- I mean, it drops quickly. Whereas the more modern portraits, not modern, the more skilled portraits tend to hold their value a little bit better.
I remember buying back like pre 2008. If you bought a prior school portrait that wasn't even like prior, but a decent school portrait, back then they were like probably $3,500 for a prior school portrait. $4,000, maybe even a little bit more, $5,000. But today you can get a nice portrait for under 1,000, way under 1,000, under 500, and
Wow.
it's a big difference. It's like probably lost.
And what we mean to
80% of the
clarify
value.
when we're saying prior school is we're saying someone who painted in the manner, in the style of William Pryor during the same time period. So not by the man himself, but by one of his followers or someone influenced by him.
Right.
Well, here's a question: were they necessarily influenced by, or by him, or were they both influenced by the same person?
Or are you saying were they both just shitty artists?
Well, yes.
Travis, do you have a mannequin of you in your place?
I do not have a mannequin of myself. Why?
Oh, because you stopped any movement. You're just like in one motion.
Oh,
You're done.
really? I seem like I'm moving when I'm looking at
not
myself
in
in the screen.
Not on
Travis has the
video.
worst internet known to man.
Hey, I live in Uxbridge, Massachusetts. There's only one provider. I can't get anything fiber optic based out here.
Oh, you're back.
Oh, beautiful.
So,
You're back.
I mean, so in general, if people have portraits from 100 years ago, 200 years ago, that they've inherited as family pieces, do they have value? The answer is yes, but how much?
Unless it's exceptionally well done or a very unusual subject matter. Like, if you have a portrait of your great-great-grandmother as a 6-year-old surrounded by like 12 kittens, 3 dogs, and a cat, that's probably going to be a well above average portrait. Unless it's
More pets, the
painted.
better.
Yeah.
yeah, the more
or-
pets, the better.
Or you have like some crazy 1790s portrait of your ancestor and it was a little risque and she left out some side boob, maybe like an 8th nipple,
Yeah.
through the roof.
Wait, a what?
An 1/8 of a nipple. Like, so you
like
just
8th nipple. I'm like, I don't think you're. Never mind.
1/8 of a nipple.
How many nipples do you think people have, Travis?
I've
Well,
read
not
you.
pigs, Travis.
Hey, I've read actually it's quite common to have 3 nipples. A lot of
A
people
third,
have 3.
sure. 4, maybe 5, maybe 6. Now you're into like cattle and pigs and such. No, man, that's just creepy.
Have a
I
whole
just
row.
can't even imagine
side.
having like a third random
cow.
nipple on the side of my stomach.
Oh,
So portraiture obviously is just, it could come back 20 years from now and be popular again. Who knows? I don't know. Maybe it could. But as of now, people like modern things. So portraiture is sort of on the side, unless you're into modern portraiture, and then it kind of fits with all cool decor of today.
Which I think if we're gonna bring up a modern portrait, if we're gonna shift to that, I think probably the one that not shattered, the country's thought of portraiture is that, in 2000 when was it? What was it? 2008 maybe or 2010, whenever when Cahind Wildly, did the portrait of Barack Obama for his presidential portrait. I mean, totally mind-blowing in terms of what people thought a presidential portrait could be.
Oh, that bothered a lot of people. I mean,
yeah. And, you know,
because it was so different.
And Cahin Wildley is, you know, in terms of if you're going to name someone who's like the king of contemporary portraiture in a marketplace today, I'd say he's pretty much a top dog. Definitely a top contender for sure.
Yeah, and for those of you who haven't seen the Wiley portrait, I'll bring it up right now, but it's basically President Obama sitting in a wooden chair, a classic, wooden chair from the White House, but he's surrounded by all these plants and flowers, basically on a green field.
2018 was when it was painted.
Yeah. It's way different than the traditional presidential portrait.
I mean, this painting itself just was on a major national tour through several museums. I was actually really pissed because it came to the MFA in Boston, and I did not get the opportunity to go see it. I don't know if it's still on tour, but typically, resides in the National Gallery. But no, I mean, just to see his work in person, like even where our buddy Aaron, who's been on the podcast, and he's a member of the Mint, or on the board of the Mint Museum, they have a Cahin Wildley portrait in their collection. Just to see the vibrancy and the patination of the color. I mean, the botanicals in the background almost kind of remind me of, old wallpaper, like floral wallpaper or something like that you would have. I don't know. It's really remarkable, I think, to see what people have thought of what a presidential portrait needs to be for 200 years to then see that is like, whoa.
And I just brought up the one of George Bush, who's previous president, and it's dull. I mean, it's actually got more life than most of the previous presidential portraits.
I think for the time, it was awesome.
Yeah. I mean, this is way different, but if you look at most of the typical ones, like Warren G. Harding.
Wow, that Bush portrait, to me, is very almost social realist, like a Rockwell or a Stephen Dohano, something like that.
It's very, very nice looking painting. I liked it.
It's better than most. I mean,
actually, this portrait right here, this isn't it. I like this portrait too. See, for that had to be 1920s.
Yep, 1920, 1923, when Harding was president.
Boom, looks like Maxfield Parrish.
Yeah, you know what it is? It's the blue and the orange right there in the corner.
Right, it's very Maxfield
it's that little
Parrish
color shift
looking in the background, in the greens and the blues and that whole thing.
A little bit of a dreamlike feeling to it.
Oh, 1923, bingo.
But this is what we typically expect to see. And sorry, I was bringing it up.
See, but you have to be able to look at these paintings and appreciate them for their time period, because if you try to just say, oh, let me just compare that to what is hot or what's the thing for now, then everything's going to suck. And that's why things are kind of the way they are, because people don't have an eye and don't have the scholarship like they used to look at a portrait and go, wow, that's a really great portrait for what was going on in 1920s or whatever. And that's why, like, you really need the collectors who do have a few portraits who still have them up, but you can't sell them to the common folk.
Well, and that's a good point. I mean, getting a portrait painted is not a cheap endeavor.
How much is an average portrait to be painted today by an artist?
Oh, I didn't say so, but I looked it up. It's around $10,000 to $12,000.
Oh, yeah.
For someone of a reasonable talent. I mean, not an amazing, well-known artist, but someone who does a good job.
Right.
That $10,000 to $12,000 seems to be. You can get them done for cheaper. If you want to get one that is by a little more modern in style, that's actually astonishingly cheaper. More people are painting in a less realistic, looser fashion. So if you want to get yourself painted as like a superhero, you can get that done for a couple $100.
Right.
I mean, oh yeah.
All right. So when is this one from? Is this like 1940s?
This is 1920s, also late 20s.
Okay.
But
very bland.
It's also Warren G. Harding, but a much more conservative style, more traditional.
It looks like it's in between wars. That you say. Look at the eagle up in the corner. It looks like it's on like a federal document.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but this is caused a dead giveaway for the 20s.
Oh yeah.
So I'm curious, what's like if you jump to, Because I'm thinking about when like modernism was hot, in the United States, people living with mid-century in the 50s, 60s. What's it look like if you go look at a Kennedy or a Nixon portrait?
No, you're gonna love this one. It was a Truman presidential portrait. Was great.
Really? I believe Kevin is eating a Twizzler. Is that what that is?
I had him in my pocket.
Yeah, I'm so jealous of that Twizzler right now.
It's totally okay. If you want to see what we're talking about on screen, check out the YouTube link in the show notes.
So Truman's presidential portrait is honestly, I get a kick out of it because his face is really well painted. The background's a little bit softer, but it's got some of the most dramatic lighting I've seen on a presidential portrait.
It's beautifully lit. Wow.
The
illumination in his face is wonderful.
It's got the Capitol building in the background. It's a very flattering portrait.
I'll be honest, the sky is a little stormy for me.
Well, it was just after World War II. He just dropped a couple of atomic bombs. The Cold War was starting.
Guy just like flattened Japan.
That was just post-war. Now we look at Gerald Ford's presidential portrait.
Wow.
Way too loose.
Wow. That one definitely looks like he come right out of Federal Hill.
But this one is in the National Gallery.
Was he an extra in The Sopranos?
Yeah, looks like he's waiting outside of Camille's restaurant for his ride.
Well, here's a kicker. So there are several different versions of this. Several portraits like this that are painted in the same suit. Okay. And there's like 4 or 5 different ones. And it's just different angles. And they're all that kind of slightly loose style. But, holding the pipe, trying to look all casual and such.
Oh, that is so fun.
And the thing is, the presidential portraits aren't really reflective of the contemporary art of the times necessarily. Sometimes you have that moment, like with Barack Obama. But honestly, they just seem to be more reflective of what was the popular boardroom style portrait of the time.
Maybe I'll have a portrait done of Ashley and I. That would be crazy.
You should, but get it done in a more in a funky style.
Should I have it be like the center?
Get it done with like the pitchfork and shit. You guys say that in front of your farm,
like American Gothic.
There it is. That's what the word's called. I don't know. I didn't go to art school. Travis, you should have known what I meant. But yeah, do it like that.
American Gothic. Yeah.
Hell yeah, do that.
Just have it be like the centerpiece of our house.
So when you think of, let's say, Richard Nixon, okay, he's going to get his presidential portrait painted by probably the best known artist of his time, right? The 1970s. Who do you think that artist is?
Oh God, was Rockwell still around?
Bam! Got it in one, Governor.
Oh, wow, it is Rockwell.
Look at the hand to chin pose. Jesus.
Dude,
that's a great
he's
painting.
Looking sultry right
Boyd's
there.
Flexing. He's trying to cover that thing up, but we know it's there, Tricky Dick. We know it's there.
That right there is a very seductive Richard Nixon.
It's actually my favorite portrait of Nixon.
He looks like he's trying to fuck me.
He does. He's giving bedroom eyes. I
feel very
there's a magnetism that Clinton didn't have.
We have to wrap this up. I need to leave. I need to go file a report with I don't know.
Hey, I'm staring into the eyes of this painting right now, and you're right. I think he's trying to bang me.
He is. Yep. He's like, listen, I understand that we may not align politically speaking, but you know you want this Tricky Dick. That's
just Google the Norman Rockwell portrait.
Do you know who else? Hey, do you know what he looks like in this painting, or who he looks like?
Mm-hmm. Who?
Hey,
Burt Reynolds without the mustache?
Nope.
Bam.
James Supp?
No.
In bed with Nixon.
Hey, it's a huge painting.
Well, no, that's the one from his presidential library. I went there a couple years back.
Oh, hey, he looks like the Dos Equis guy.
Dos Equis?
I don't always drink. Yeah, the beer, like, I don't always drink.
Take that shit back, man.
Dude, you're not going to tell me he looks like the Dos Equis guy right there. When he's saying
a very American version of the Dos Equis guy.
Yeah, when he's sitting, just no beer, but it's the same posture, the same feeling.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe the Dos Equis guy ripped Richard Nixon's
I don't always
shtick.
steal from the people, but when I do.
I'm not always a crook, but when I do, I put my hand under my chin like I'm posing for my senior photo.
This is awesome. This was a fun episode. Who would have thought portraiture could be so fun?
I'll tell you.
I mean, there's another picture of me back when I was with Nixon. Back when I was Forrest Gumping through the universe.
How did you? Did you just make that?
No, that was when I was Nixon on the Great Wall of China.
You don't recall?
You're telling me you had
talks about it all the time.
I mean, and this is me at the Nixon desk at the White House.
Look at the reflection.
So, like, why do you have these pictures prepared, James?
Yeah, there's no way.
There I was at the Tournament of Roses parade, driving Nixon around.
Why do you have these ready? How did you know we were going to talk about Richard Nixon today?
Do you love Richard Nixon?
Like a bastard.
I have had these in my pocket for years.
Just waiting for the right moment, which apparently is today. So go check out the YouTube channel. If that doesn't make you subscribe, I don't know what will.
That is unbelievable. And oddly enough, I never knew why, but for some reason, Richard Nixon is like my dad's all-time favorite president.
That's a red flag.
My dad loves Richard Nixon for some reason.
Yeah, weird that the police chief loves the guy who had to go on TV and say that he was not a crook. Very strange.
That's awesome.
So at the Nixon Presidential Library in Yorba Linda, California. Freaking amazing, by the way. But they had all these opportunities for you to do all these selfies. And they were well set up. Like, literally, they had this background with the cutouts of Nixon and the First Lady, and you just stand next to them. I mean, I had so much fun there. It was one of the best days of my life for selfies.
I like that final note for this show notes. I'd like write stuff down that we talk about as we talk about it. The last little bullet point for this episode is James hangs with Nixon. That's the last point, because that's been the last 5 minutes.
Keep on Nixon.
That is awesome.
Good way to wrap.
Is that a wrap, PK?
That's a wrap, baby. Make sure you guys rate and subscribe to the Justuff League wherever you listen. Spotify has a star rating, so why don't you go 5-star us, please? Apple Podcasts, written reviews are the nicest things that you could do in the world for a podcast, so please go do that. If you want to see the visuals and all the paintings that we talked about today, these goofy-ass photos of James, Jesus Christ, they're so goofy. Make sure you go check out the YouTube link. There is a link in the show notes, and we will see you next week. Justuff League.